I would like to thank Brand Grand for submitting this comment. Also, Proverbs 13, verse 24. If you spare the rod, you spoil the child. I grew up hearing that verse. It no longer says that. My pastor days, the Bible didn't change because the sun did not go down at noon, but she wouldn't open her Bible and read it in front of me. I got rebuked every sermon after I brought this to her attention. With other verses, I had to quit. I'm there to hear the truth. Alright, so spare the rod, spoil the child. It's not in the Bible, but here's some other interesting information. Spare the rod and spoil the child is not in the Bible. It may not mean what you think. It's not surprising that many people think that the quote, spare the rod and spoil the child, comes from the Bible. There are at least 5 verses in the Bible's book of Proverbs that talk about using a rod to beat a child for his own good, of course. The most famous proverb, 13:24, he that spareth his rod hateth his son, but he that loveth him chastises him meetiveness times. Proverbs 22:13-14 offers this bit of Old Testament parenting advice. Withhold not correction from the child, for if thou beatest him with the rod, he shall not die. Thou shalt beat him with the rod, and shalt deliver him soul from hell. However, although spare the rod and spoil the child was probably inspired by these biblical verses, it does not come from Proverbs or any other part of the Bible. It's from the long 17th century poem Hudibras from Samuel Butler, 1612-1680, a cheeky British poet who enjoyed mocking religious extremists and hypocrites. Butler's epic satire follows the trials and tribulations of Sir Hudibras. Initially, the poem describes Hudibras as a noble and pious knight, but during the course of the story, he is shown to be a buffoonish poser and nitwit. Butler published Hudibras in 3 parts, in 1663, 1664, and 1678. The famous spare the rod quote comes in part 2, which was entered into the Stationery's Registry, Britain's early version, at a copyright office on November 5th, 1663.
Here's a red-letter date in the history of science, November 5th, 1955. Yes, of course, November 5th, 1955. Why, I don't get what happened. That was the day I invented time travel. I remember it vividly. Remember the 5th of November, the gunpowder treason plot. I know of no reason why the gunpowder treason should ever be forgot.
At the end of part 1, Sir Hudibras is put in prison after getting into a farce with a group of locals who were watching a beer beating entertainment. In part 2, a widow Hudibras has been wooing Corner to visit him in jail and says she'll get him out if he'll prove he truly loves her. When he tries to profess his love, she quickly rejects flowery words as the kind of proof she wants. Hold, quoth she, no more of this, Sir Knight. You take your aim amiss, for you will find in a hard chapter to catch me with poetic rapture. The widow then suggests that Oedipus could prove his love by attempting suicide. For example, she says if he tried to hang himself, she would believe him and cut him down before he died. Oedipus thinks that option sounds a bit too harsh, so the widow suggests that Oedipus could prove his love by whipping himself or by letting her whip him. She then explains the benefits of the virtuous school of lashing. Near the end, her spell on the joys of the whip, the widow utters the famous "spare the rod" quotation. If matrimony and hanging go by destiny, why not whipping too? What medicine else can cure the fits of lovers when they lose their wits? Love is a boy by poets stilled, then spare the rod and spoil the child. Oedipus promises to enroll in the school of lashing if the widow gets him released. She does, but then Oedipus reneges on his promise, betrayal that sets up the plot of part 3 of the poem, in which Oedipus gets his final comeuppance. Samuel Butler is almost certainly thinking of the biblical verses about rods and children when he wrote his own famous line about them. And on the surface, his words "spare the rod and spoil the child" may seem to have a meaning similar to the Bible verse, i.e. parents should discipline their children with physical punishment if they want them to turn out right, and keep them from becoming spoiled brats or worse. However, what Butler implied in between the lines of his satiric verse believed to be more body than biblical. One theory is that it's a nudge nudge wink wink comment on how to spoil and thus prevent a pregnancy. Other theories suggest it may refer to sexual fetishes involving a dominatrix, bondage and discipline, sex games, and sexual spanking and whipping. One thing is certain that Samuel Butler was talking about in that part of his poem, Oedipus, is a bit different than what the pious authors of the book of Proverbs had in mind. 5 reasons to stop using 1 Timothy 2:12 against women. It baffles me that the #1 search term used to find the Junaria Project blog is some version of 1 Timothy 2:18 through 15. Every single day. One, authority is a poor translation of the Greek word Paul uses in 1 Timothy 2:12. Applying 1 Timothy 2:12 literally, but not doing the same for the surrounding verses, is shoddy hermeneutics. Paul's restriction was given in the context of a personal letter to Timothy giving advice about a specific issue in the church at Ephesus. Using this passage to restrict women in leadership requires elevating a handful of verses over the rest of Paul's writings, not to mention the entire New Testament. Churches find it impossible to put 1 Timothy 2:12 into practice in a consistent or logical way. After evaluating on these points, I came up with this elevator speech. This isn't rocket science, and it's time to set this one aside, or at least admit that 1 Timothy 2:12 should not be used in the debate.